Welcome to today's show, where we are joined by a very special guest, Mr. Randy Yaloz. Randy is a well-known figure in Republican circles with deep involvements in the United States politics and international relations. Recently, he was in Romania alongside Donald Trump Jr. as part of a larger European tour, engaging with key political figures and discussing the future of the United States' relations with Europe. With the 2024 U.S. presidential election looming and the geopolitical landscape constantly shifting, today's controversial and conversational dive is actually meant to be in crucial topics, as well as Randy's unique perspective on transatlantic relations, Romania's role in NATO, and of course the strategic shaping of the future of the Republican Party. So stay tuned for an insightful discussion, and with this I want to welcome you, Mr. Yaloz, thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you for
Of course, I'm alongside my co-host for today. He is usually my guest on my show as an analytical commentator.
Welcome
but thank you, Mr. Iacob.
In Romania, Randy.
Thank you.
Nice to see you again here.
Thank you, Dorin.
And listen you.
With your permission, I suggest we begin. First of all, Mr. Yaloz, you were recently in Romania with Donald Trump Jr. He just left a few days ago as part of a European tour. Could you share more details about the purpose of the tour and what key themes were addressed by Mr. Donald Trump Jr.?
Mr. Trump Jr. was on a business vision trip. He shared his vision of business across Eastern Europe and what can be done across Eastern Europe. But he also focused a little bit on his vision of our campaign, American politics, and where we're heading, because he feels strongly and he knows that he's actively involved in his father's campaign. Just to remind your audience, Donald Trump Jr. has become a very, very active figure in politics and American GOP politics. He's side by side become a close advisor for his father. He's an outspoken leader on social media, and he has many, many followers. In addition, his contacts have been very important, especially with J.D. Vance. It's a very close friend of Donald Trump Jr., and he's the one that convinced his father to take him on as a vice president candidate. So you can imagine how close the relations have become. Donald Trump Jr. has become and is an important figure in American GOP politics.
And of course, the influence he has upon Donald Trump, since J.D. Vance was nominalized as the suggestion becoming from Donald Trump Jr. But how does this reflect the broader image and the broader Republican engagement within Europe? And here I'm referring to especially in the context of the U.S. upcoming presidential elections.
Across Europe, you have, I'm the president of a Republicans Overseas Action, and we've been working very, very hard to get Americans living overseas. We're over 11 million Americans living overseas that vote. At least half of the states have less of a population if you were to put the total number of Americans living abroad. Romania has the same situation. You have millions of Romanians, as you do for elections, living abroad. You have the same issue going to your legislative and presidential elections, the same for the Americans. So many Americans, we're out there, we're getting Americans to register and to vote for the November elections. This is the first time, really, that the GOP has been extremely active for foreign Americans living abroad. Before, they were much more passive because we were playing a much more active role. We've also had influences in different elections. In the 2000 elections between Gore at the time and Bush, the Israeli caucus, where you had Americans living in Israel, we have 500,000 to 600,000 Americans living there. They played a role in making the election shift toward Bush at the time. So it's a very important type of situation we're in. He is addressing issues normally that the Democrats and the Republicans don't address, like taxation for Americans living abroad. It's very complicated. We have obligations for tax obligations for America and within the country which we reside. So those are issues that they brought up, and it's new in GOP politics. The Democrats have been very active too, and they're more active in the field, but we were catching up, and we're doing a great job. Mr. Donald Trump Jr. met with some of our leaders. We talked about the GOP. He also sent on social media some messages for our different GOP actions that we're doing across Israel and different countries. So he's decided to take an active role, and he's being very supportive in social media for our push to get the vote. And this is a very important thing we're doing, and I believe, I know we'll probably have a talk about a little bit about Romanian politics, but I think that's an important aspect across different of politics today. And this is why you're saying to us, why is he here? Why is he going abroad? It's also to develop allies, but there's also a sense and awakening within the GOP is realizing to make strategic alliances, at least create a dialogue with patriotic parties across Europe and saying, well, we want to have common ground with common parties that have a vision that's like America, like the Republican Party. How do we move forward? How do we try to find common ground?
A bridge for dialogue.
Yeah, dialogue, and have common sense. As you hear Donald Trump saying a lot, it's common sense policies, common grounds for common sense policy. And that's what's missing in today's politics. You
know, it's a nice surprise for me, and we were talking before that, this rally between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, the new nominated
very interesting today,
candidate for the Democratic Party.
Today in state, Donald Trump, the president, will meet Mr. Zelensky in a private meeting, which is going to be a very
especially Donald
day.
Trump, who said that if he wins the war, the war of the elections, he will stop the war. The first phone call he will make will be to Vladimir Putin and to Zelensky.
He's already shared his vision. He believes that this unfortunate situation has led to a lot of bloodshed across Ukraine and Russia. We've lost 1 million souls in this unfortunate war. Naturally, there are many interests. A lot of it has to do with the military industries across different sectors, whether it's across the United States. I think the interest of the Democrat Party with military-industrial complex United States, they're very along the same lines. I know they'll be influenced at the same time, but I believe that we can have a solid industry, create opportunities for military, but at the same time, without all the risks that we're exposing ourselves. Again, as we hear the Biden administration and Harris administration saying, well, Zelensky is being pushy. He wants to get authorization to get high-tech missiles to be able to launch ballistic missiles all the way deep into Russia, which, if we listen to Putin clearly, because when you listen to Putin, you really have to listen to Putin, because when Putin says he'll do something, and we all know that. He has the realpolitik. He says, I consider that an attack by NATO if they authorize deep penetration of missiles into Russian territory. And now they've pulled back the Biden and Harris administration with the UK. But again, they're playing with fire. We don't know how far this can go. And as we know, things can happen by accident. Some things can occur. A missile can, again, when you're playing with these type of situations, it's dangerous at one point, and it's pushing the situation. I also believe that the issue may become even much more volatile as we get closer to the elections, because again, this is going to be something very important. And so if the Biden administration and Harris feel that they may be losing the elections, they may push the war agenda a little harder to create pressure, international pressure, and push people and say we need to keep the stability for having a Harris and Biden administration continue over for the next 4 years. Because normally in America, when you have a war, normally you don't want to change the president or that's in place. So you might want to create a situation where it's so volatile that you might want to push things saying, well, we can't do things, we're in a highly dangerous situation. So, Americans are aware of that. And we know that there are issues of mercenaries from different countries, NATO countries, that are fighting on the battlefront for Ukraine. That's been around. You can hear that if you do some research. So they're existing. So they're indirectly maybe troops that are now officially troops on the ground, but we've heard that there may be mercenaries, and there are substantive reports that have been out there. So, I mean, it's a dangerous type of thing. That's what happened also in Vietnam. Just realize that the stepping up of involvement between the United States in the Vietnam War was a similar type of thing. And when we had military instructors, we had mercenaries, and then finally we found ourselves in a war. So we need to be careful of this stepping up approach that's happening in Ukraine. And I feel that Trump is very clear. He has been clear during his term. He was well respected, whether it was by the Chinese leaders, whether it was by Putin, whether it was by North Korean leader. All of them respected him, and they've understood that Trump set a line, a limit on how we to do it, and he gained respect. Biden, Harris, when she left in 2022, the meetings with Zelensky, 3 days later, the Russians launched the war. So there is no deterrence factor with Mrs. Harris. She is a poor international leader. She lacks leadership, and we've seen it as the borders are in America. We have a disaster going on in our southern border with immigration.
Randy, may I ask you something? Could consider the American people are divided in two, one for war and one for peace? Not actually related with the election, but like attitude.
You know, the Americans are very focused on their national agenda. You know, many Americans, and the key issue in American politics, and I believe the way in Romania, I believe in most of your democracies, at least in Western Europe, where we come from, France, and other countries, it's the economic issues. Work, prosperity, am I a job? Will I have a place to live? Can I pay for my groceries? Can I pay for my rent? Are my children going to school? Can I afford to pay for tuition for going to college? Security in the streets, local in America against crime. These are the main factors in America. Foreign policy plays into effect, especially when we're spending billions and billions of dollars at one point when Americans are suffering like they are today. But it also comes into effect when you end up having soldiers on the ground at one point. Today, you're not saying an issue, but we are flirting with a major war, and Mr. Trump has warned, we're playing with, flirting with World War III, as he said on many occasions when you hear him at his rallies or when he's been doing interviews. You're flirting with World War III. Russia's a nuclear power. You're pushing buttons. We know Zelensky is desperate. We know Zelensky, if Zelensky loses this war, Zelensky has a lot to lose on his back.
It's very tough, what you say now, for
Romania.
For Romania, for media, generally speaking, because sometimes I have the sensation, and maybe you are, I know you are, you know, sometimes media are controlled by a narrative which it's allowed to say or not to say.
No, but the narrative in America is supportive. The Democrats and the media are supportive of the Ukraine war. I think many of the Americans feel bad, and they're supportive of Ukraine because they were attacked by Russia. If you were to ask Americans, yes, they're against it, but at the same time, they see the useless war that, again, 1 million people have died, and the Americans see it, and it's not going anyplace. And we have to, you know, Boris Johnson, in the early days of the war, refused to Putin put a peace deal on the table, and Boris Johnson, on behalf of the U.S. and, of course, the U.K., because Boris Johnson doesn't act alone, refused within the first 3 months of the war to stop the war. We could have stopped the war. We would have had better borders with Russia. We wouldn't have lost that much territory for Ukraine early on in the war.
And it was acceptable by Ukrainians.
Yeah, the Ukrainians were willing to accept it at that time. We don't talk about it much, but if you look into conservative media, you hear about this. If you listen to also to Mr. Donald Trump Jr., he pointed it out. If at one point some of your viewers listened to his speech that he did here, he talked about it, that again, and during his trip, he talked about that of course, it's important. The war is, of course, everybody's supportive of the war, but to the extent is how it's being led, what are the risks being taken, why is the war being pushed as an agenda across the board? Again, we're having major issues, and I think Americans are supportive, but again, there's also waste. We don't talk about corruption in Ukraine, which is also another major issue, which the Republicans have raised many times is that where is the money going, and is it being used properly? Is the money and the equipment and you've seen Mr. Zelensky throw out many of his ministers because of issues of corruption. So we know it's a major problem. It was before the war. It still is, and it continues to go on. And on a regular basis, you see scandals of corruption going on in Zelensky's governments. So I still see it being a problem. No matter, you'll hear the Democrats and you'll hear the military, you'll hear everybody say, no, everything's under control. But on the sidelines, you see it right away. You can also see the Biden laptop affair. You said there were issues of corruption with the Biden family, which we don't talk about so much because the media, when you're mainstream media, there's also issues of corruption.
Depends which side of the media,
yeah,
of course.
It depends which side of conservative media you hear about it. They just admitted today, recently, that the Biden, the laptop story wasn't a fake during the 2020 elections, and they realized that it was truthful and that there were issues that were put on the table. So again, you know, Americans who want to see the truth can go on social media. What's different.
I mean, I saw the debate with Kamala Harris and President Trump, and I saw the journalists who were addressing the questions, the moderators. It was clear to see which side they were on even before they opened their mouth, and it happened every single time. The only time we saw any fact checks, they were given towards Donald Trump and always said that they're actually fake, everything that he has been saying, all of his allegations, whereas Kamala Harris, which have been proved to be a nonsense, have been approved. But do you think that Kamala Harris is still not defined? Because, you know, the last presidential debate between those two, it was kind of split or quite directed towards Kamala Harris as being the leader. We remember when it was like the debate with Donald Trump and Biden. Biden eventually snapped out of his role and he left the election. But now I think that Donald Trump hasn't really defined Kamala Harris. Was he in his best mood at that day?
You know, I believe that you had the journalists against him. Of course, the burden was against him. Again, they were trying to knock him out. There was no fact checking, as you said, that was done against Kamala Harris. It came out again, and it was explained afterwards that there were many, many falsehoods that were said during her different speeches. At the same time, I believe the Americans realized she maybe had a relatively satisfactory in the form, but in substance, she didn't say much. And what is essential, and I think wraps up many of the things, because when you listen to the Democrats, when you listen to Mrs. Harris, she puts an agenda for A, B, and C. I will do this, I will do that. You're with Mr. Biden now. You're the vice president.
You were there. You had the chance to do it.
So do it now.
You are there.
Why do you stop proposing?
And that's what Donald Trump said at the end of his speech. But why didn't he start
do it
with
from the
that?
beginning? But that's the reality of the situation. It's being hammered. And I believe Americans see it. They fully understand it, because when you listen to, I just debated also with the Democrats on nationally in France yesterday, you have the same issue come up. You know, well, we've made improvements in national crime. We've brought down immigration, illegal immigration, but look at the real situation. Look what's happening. And, you know, they'll pull out certain numbers, they'll extract certain things. And when you look at the reality on the ground, go into the big cities across America, look at Chicago, look at the question. I think it's a case in point when you look at the question of the Haitian situation that was raised during the elections.
In the France media, with such a kind of information and approach. Before, it was many times also control. And media was like, we cannot talking about this. But now, even for our CNA, we must to know and to understand everywhere it's allowed now to talking free about all this issue. Immigrants, war, peace. Deep state, control of media. It's allowed to speak about this because we must to come back in the normality, in the democracy. That's it's about.
And talk about why we brought it to the forefront. In France, you had brought about elections it was in the last presidential elections, because you had Mr. Zemmour, who was a very hard right candidate. He was able to bring the issue of immigration to the table, and that's what pushed it into the media for the last 2 or 3 years in France. That was one point. But also today, you see illegal immigration. Look what's happening in Germany. All of a sudden, the policies are changing. They fear hard-right parties will take power. And they know the center-left, center-right parties, Europeists, say to themselves, if we don't put a brake on immigration, we may lose control of our national governments. So they're becoming tougher. Look at Mrs. Maloney. Did the same thing, made a declaration just, I think, a week or two ago talking about the same thing. She's getting tough on immigration. So all these European leaders that had a more conservative, I would say more relaxed approach regarding immigration are shifting. They've wanted it, but now it's becoming more mainstream. And they realize, look at the results of the German elections. The hard right parties have gained much more votes, and they're shifting to the right. Today, that's what has been happening. In France, too, there's a strong desire to go to the right, conservative right, patriotic right. Why? Because the left is not doing its job. The center left, center right, it's not doing its job. And that's why in the French elections, you even had Mr. Macron, the center right, the left, all gang up against Mrs. Le Pen to be able to form their own majority. So you needed everybody across the political spectrum to fight against the National Rally in France. This is going to happening and will probably be happening across Germany. It's a possibility, I think, even across Romania. I know you have the center-left and the center-right are also fighting to keep their power. They're in a coalition today.
Together, which is
and they're fighting against each other today for the elections. But again, there is fear. How are they going to position themselves? How are they going to do it? But you might find yourself in a similar situation. You will probably find again a coalition because the only way to preserve, people are afraid of for stability. They don't want to go too much to the right. They don't want to go too much to the left. That's what Macron was able to get a center-right coalition. That's what they're looking to. So now you have European leaders shifting more to the right to listen to the voices of the people. And I think that is important. But will they be able to maintain their direction that they are looking for? It's another issue. But I think it's something that's going to be entering all across politics, whether it's Eastern Europe, you have France, Germany. It's not going to be just limited to that. In America, it's the same thing. Immigration has become one of the top topics of our electoral races this last year, 2 years, and going for next year. And again, I believe you will see that in America. It has changed the face of our society, the way we live in America. And I think the major issues, and I believe it's very, very important for you, Romanians, because you, for the moment, are preserved. We see that for the moment, you will slowly be required under European Union rules and policy to open up your borders, have more immigration. The question is, how will you do it? Will you do it? Will you fight and reject EU policy like Mr. Orban? Will you have a different approach? That is for you to decide. It's decide for your governments. Will your politicians be strong enough to fight against the EU and resist a little bit like Orban? Or will you not resist and have to open up your doors at one point to this immigration wave, and which will change the face of your society?
I have a special opinion here. Thanks God, our parties, the left, center-right parties, are somehow balanced regarding this issue. They are, of course, influenced by European Union, but I'm sure they resist. They are also somehow conservative, thanks God, because the Romanian people are somehow conservative regarding religious, family, culture, immigrants. And I have this trust. We don't play with this issue so easy, even if the European make pressure. The current policy
I would like to circle back a bit to your visit with Donald Trump Jr. Have you met with any Romanian officials? And if yes, what was his message towards them? I
don't know to the extent I think informally there may have been officials in the public. I don't know who they are. They know who they are. They were there. But he did send out a message. And he sends out a strong message, as Trump said, we need strong allies. and I keep on saying it, is without strong allies, we cannot do anything. The way you create is building up your national industries, your economy, your culture, because if you have good education, you become also a technological hub in Eastern Europe. You had the privilege of also having the Israeli Minister of Technology, Innovation, that came to visit at the same time, and she came to promote also ties and saying that it's very important for Israel, for the US, and for it to develop in technologies with Romania, because they have been moving ahead in these directions. So I believe that the message is clear and that there will be advances in these areas. And Romania has a key position. You have a large number of natural resources. You have a large population compared to your neighbors, which is quite important, except for the exception, of course, of Poland. But beyond Poland, I would say central to southern Europe, you are one of the more populated. You have been able to grow over the last 30 years since the 90s, since you had the revolution here and you've gone to power. So things have become very advanced, and you need to continue in that good direction that you're heading. And again, it's important for your economy, your leaders, to invest in the military, to invest in technologies, and attract businesses. That is the key to success, is attract businesses, key sectors to your country, whether it be in high-tech, automobile industries, whatever, energy. Again, you must be at the forefront. You must be a leader in these areas to ensure your future.
You see, Randy, that I like to Republican Party and Mr. Trump. They consider it partners, someone who is strong, who have personality, who decide for himself first, according to his culture, his tradition. That it's a good partner. If not, you are not a partner. You are a country assistant.
And to his necessities. And how do you think the U.S. relationship will be with Romania under Trump's second term?
As he said, he was tough with the Europeans. Well, under Merkel, he says, you guys, you better pay your part of NATO or else I'm going to pull my troops. But he needs, you know what I call it? Tough love. It's tough love in real politics. It's tough love.
How parents have with their children.
Yeah, he says, okay, shape up, get your act together. If not, you take care of yourself. That's pretty much what he did. And look, what have we seen in the last few years? We have seen a buildup, whether it's Romania, whether it's all across other NATO allies, have built up their military industries. They have reinvested in their industries, whether it's Germany, France, and their focuses. And that's what they're doing. And I think it's a key factor. Let me to give you an excellent example of how to be respected. Look at Israel. Israel, what I always say to people in Europe, you're a wonderful democracy here in Romania, and you have wonderful democracies across all of the European Union. Israel also is in the middle of a very dangerous and volatile area in the Middle East. They have to fend for themselves. They need to be strong. They invest in technology, industry, and so on. And even though they work with America, they have a relationship where there's a give and take. When they talk about issues, when they talk about alliances, when they talk about politics, when they're doing things, you should be in a similar situation individually or even as a group to be able to have some muscle as individual. I believe it's a healthier approach. I even think it's healthy, makes better allies, because then Russia fears you more than because individually also. Because when you have a strong base around an area, people feel like you're very, very solid. You understand this to be the case. So I believe strong allies make a strong future for Europe, a strong future for America, and the same thing. That's why I believe America says that they will never give in for Israel, because they know Israel is one of their strongest allies, and Israel has done what needs to be done to be considered that strong ally. I think the Europeans need to use that example in geopolitical situation, whether it's their relationship militarily, industrially, technologically. It's a small country, but you can see lessons that can be done, and I think that's something to go into the future. And that's why I think it's very good for Eastern Europeans, because I know Israel heavily invests in many industries across Eastern Europe, develop these alliances, develop in technologies, and I think that will be the future, artificial intelligence, etc.
But what about the future of having the European Union all under one single nation?
Look, I believe that the European nation idea is always a dream and a possibility, but I think it's very, very complicated for the moment. I don't think it's for now. You have some people who've hinted to it, like Mr. Macron and other Vetterleden, who say one day maybe we'll have a federalist system. This is what their dream is across Europe. But I believe we're not there yet. I believe the resistance has to come from the East, because you have a much solid, more resistant, you have a stronger tradition, you know what the nation state, we've abandoned the idea of the nation state in France. We've given a lot of too much sovereignty back to Europe. You are slowly doing that, but at the same time, you can slow down, take time, the efforts. You still have your experience from the times you used to be a former Soviet bloc, the communist. You do not want to give up your sovereignty. It is so important. We're realizing it across our nation. Look what happens when you give up your sovereignty, you lack control over your money. Today, we know how it is. Look, you have a strong patriotic party in Italy. Mrs. Meloni, who's tough. If she weren't in the union, she'd be really a hard right leader in Italy, but she has her hands tied because for the monetary policy, she is dependent on hundreds of billions of dollars for funding for her countries to be able to run her country, because if runs into problems, she doesn't have a pro-Europe approach. We've become dependent. Look at what happened a decade ago to Cyprus, when there were issues regarding the economic, where monetary issues occurred. We could one day, if we have a country is not in line with European policy, you will have a similar situation like you had in Cyprus 10 years ago, where they blocked things. Remember what Merkel did with the European Bank and so on. And again, the same thing could happen in different countries. So again, the parties, the patriotic powers need to be careful. They have to play the European party politics. They know how to manage. But I think slowly, they can build a patriotic front slowly across Europe. I think it can be done intelligently. I think it can be done over time. And they can push the spectrum, they can move it more to the right. And it takes time. They are moving toward to the right because they know that there is a risk. They know that things happen. So again, it depends on the people, and I think it's up to our leaders, whether it's in France, whether it's in America, whether it's in Romania in your future elections, that people have to get out and vote.
Let's talk a bit, sorry.
No problem, elections.
Election outlook. Donald Trump's legal battles. It's all over the news. Do you think this will influence his candidacy?
I think he's managed, he's like a captain in a storm. He knows where he needs to get to, and he's doing what he has to do. And so far, he's been able to deal with the lawfare. I mean, there's no other leader in America that has undergone such lawfare in U.S. history. It is the worst scenario we've had, that the justice system, states, national justice system has been instrumentalized and weaponized against a presidential candidate. And for us, in the Republican Party, we consider that to be election interference. What have they done? They forced him, in certain cases, to sit in court for weeks and weeks so he doesn't campaign. That's what they're pushing him. And at the same time, but they realize that there might be some limits. To give you an example, the judges are realizing that they have to be very careful too, that they don't go beyond certain reasonable limits on how they manage the lawsuits, how they manage the litigation, because look what happened in the case in New York. There was supposed to be sentencing around mid-September regarding the case where he was held liable, and there's an appeal going on. The judge was supposed to provide sentencing against Donald Trump. What did he decide to do? He decided to delay the sentencing to the end of November, after the elections, because he knew that there could be a perception of election interference. What stopped him? I believe it was good common sense. I think he made it because I believe that he realized that it would be too controversial, and he said, let me wait, let me see what's happening. And at the same time, again, the lawfare is playing into his hands. It's taking his time. They're trying to discredit him, and like I said, I think a lot will come out at the end of this different types of lawsuits that have been going on. And again, they will go up to the Supreme Court. You've heard specialists and experts. So I feel confident that Mr. Trump will win. You've seen many of the cases have been dismissed, the one on the document cases. You see also where there's a double standard. As you see, the FBI and the Justice Department went and did seizures of documents at Mar-a-Lago in Florida earlier last year to get documents. They did the same thing with Obama. There were issues regarding Biden, but who was found again? Who was sent before the courts? Who was indicted? It was only Trump who was indicted. Mr. Biden, even they said, and what was very interesting is they didn't have the necessary capacity to be up for trial. That's what they said at one point. So at one point when the USA, if you see the reports that came out on that when they interviewed Biden, when they were in the documents case, they had an interview, he doesn't understand that he was holding these documents illegal and they could be considered as a criminal offense. So this is what's been coming out. Of course, you don't hear about it in mainstream media, but these are the issues. You have the documents case was thrown out, and because it was mishandled by the FBI, that's why the judge threw it out. The evidence was mishandled, the seizures were mishandled by them, and the judge said he threw out the case afterward. As an example, we have the January 6th case coming up also regarding Trump. That's going to be coming up in October. So, of course, there's a lot of lawfare, but we feel confident Mr. Trump is focused on the election, and he will continue his fight.
Let's talk a bit about Cambridge Analytica, because we know it was a subject in the past. It was even a subject in Romania, because in the elections in 2014, Victor Ponta, who was a candidate for the presidency chair, was suspected to have contacted Cambridge Analytica, and it played unfavorable towards him. Those were the speculations. Nothing has been proven. Do you think Cambridge Analytica might still have, or a similar entity, because Cambridge Analytica no longer exists, but a similar entity might play a role in Romania's elections, in the U.S. elections?
Honestly, I'm not sufficiently well versed about what's going on, but you know there was a bit of a scandal too, that they had used information. There was questions of data that was pulled off at the time, whether they had the right to pull off information from Facebook. That was the issue in America in 2016, was whether they got millions and millions of data, personal information off of Facebook. That the question is, did they abide or no to the terms and conditions of the Facebook at the time? Some people say, I'm not that involved, that they had used the data. But at the same time, I think what's important to look at is how AI is being used to win elections. That's beyond that, what's going on, and I think that's the key element. What helped Mr. Trump at the time is he was a pioneer. Brad Pascal was the digital manager of his campaign at the time, and he was a pioneer in how he was using data and how they find the profiling of the information at the time. He's working again with Mr. Trump today on his campaign. But the way the data is being, how to target the voters, to get to know the right messaging that needs to be done, that is what's being done with today. Very, very important. Of course, you must abide by the rules regarding privacy, protection of data. We know the rules across the European Union. Imagine there are similar rules in Romania that protect data privacy and so on. But to the extent that they respect the law and that they use it, they can do profiling and they can do amazing things with data. For example, with databases that they purchase, they can do it by 5 to 10-fold reaching out to people through contacts and doing profiling. It's amazing.
Randy, you know very well Europe, country in Europe, and also states. Every time when we have election here, we're talking about how influence the Americans, I don't know who's the Americans, America, the election in Romania. Which candidate they prefer? Who are they from state to prefer someone here? What you say about this? I don't like and I don't believe such a kind of approach, such a kind of a game. I want to say that. What can you say about this? How influence could make
Look.
America, I don't know, who is this America?
Look.
In the national election somewhere in the allied country.
What would you say when you say America? I know when you say America, what reflects America in Romania or in other countries? I believe it's the big giants of big tech. You talk about Google, you talk about Facebook, you talk about Twitter. You have the big leaders.
Congressmen, the Republicans,
yes,
the
but I think
Democrats, the president.
Yeah, but I believe it's a social media. I saw the president.
Romania.
But look, I believe the social media and the internet leaders play a significant role when you're saying America, because are they positioning themselves? In America, they're the global elites. They're more in position aligned with the Democrats. So if you're saying that, maybe you're trying to explain America where you're saying, well, because these big major multinational corporations in the internet and social media are aligned with Democrat agenda as they're against Trump. We've seen it across Facebook. We've seen it across Google searches when you try to find articles about.
Could be someone interested in states to decide or to influence. This guy I like to be president in Romania, this one I don't like.
We have found in American elections, let me give you an example. I'm not going to say for here, but it happened during the election. There was interference by the U.S. administration. The Biden administration interfered during the elections. The U.S. government told them that certain contact, when you had the Biden story, look at the intelligence community, you had the Biden laptop story. Remember that?
Yes.
And they decided to go to Facebook, Twitter, and they made sure that they were censored. That was a push by the intelligence community. You had 60 people, whether in the community, and some of them were very prominent figures in the course of the saying it was Russian information, possibly Russian information, disinformation that was being passed to Biden. Now today was proven that it wasn't, and it could be considered potentially election interference, but this was pushing. And this was released during congressional hearings, that the government, that U.S. administration, I can't recall if it was the Justice Department, but the certain administrations within the U.S. government contacted social media and says, you need to censor or limit certain types of messaging that was about the GOP or certain types of audiences, certain types of people that needs to be done. There were issues that occurred like that.
That's campaign. But
that is influencing elections indirectly because...
Of course.
Okay, and the same thing, are you saying to us, well, potentially could that happen abroad? I'm not going to say yes.
I mean,
I'm not going to say no. If they do it nationally, could it happen internationally? I'm not going to say no, but it's happened nationally that the U.S. government, and they've raised it during congressional hearings because the Republicans had hearings about it, that there were issues of interference that they considered to be possible interference of getting involved and having an effect. The Biden laptop story was a classical and a major issue which brought it to the public. And it's well known, and this was just weeks before the election. And many people said if people believed the Biden laptop story was true, Biden would have lost the elections. Many experts say that. So the fact is that they could have influenced the elections occurs in America. Do I say that it could not occur elsewhere? Has America not tried to influence elections across the world? Well, there are many cases that we've heard that they've tried to influence. We've had issues. But again, I mean, that's something you need to look at. Is it potential? There's a potential. The question is, I believe that the American agenda also goes to reinforce American economic interests. So the question is, how do you inform companies, whether it's not the national policy is not necessarily for the government, but I believe that you have major interests, whether
politicians
media,
actually they come and say, I was blessed in America to be the president.
Yeah, but or rather to favor one candidate. Like here, for example, we have Mircea Joana. He's independent, and he was part of NATO. And here, some might say, yeah, but does that mean that he is supported by the U.S. and he might have an advantage? On the other side, we see another candidate, and when he announced his candidacy, the ambassador of the United States in Romania joined him on stage to show this appreciation and belonging towards his candidacy. So what do we take from that?
Progressist party, anyhow.
So no, for sure, I think that one way or the other, that I believe that your candidates have a certain amount of legitimacy, that they're using their legitimacy and their close relationship with America has an impact on what they're doing, because they want to be considered a friend of America. Because like I said to you, I give you the example of when you're not considered as a friend of America. Look at Mrs. Le Pen in France. They would say she was pro-Putin at the time. So they're trying to push an agenda. So look how, even though she's not saying that, the question is said, well, the approach should be more balanced regarding how you have foreign policy a little bit, the more balanced approach. But again, that's what they criticize her for, being maybe too pro-Putin and so on. But of course, that's what you'll hear about, the same thing about Orban, you'll hear about certain people. So the question is, they want to have the support of America, but I believe at the same time, the support comes with it. And I think today it's a much more delicate game. I think the approach will be more balanced if it's a Republican candidate that wins the election. I think that it'll be more pragmatic, not as much focused on, again, you do what we want. That's, I believe, the vision a little bit of the Biden administration says, where Trump says, yes, you're our partner, we're going to be there for you. Okay, we're the big brother, but you better be tough yourselves.
Have
okay?
personality.
Yeah, have a personality. And that's, the Democrats really don't want that. In fact, the Democrats...
That's a huge difference, yeah.
Tough love or no love at all?
No, they love is like, but you do what I say to you, and that's it. And you sit in the corner. But look, Trump promotes businesses. He's an entrepreneur. He wants people to succeed. Whereas the Democrats, they want a situation where you have a state aid society, a welfare state, we call it in America, where you just give out, handing out.
And control it.
And control, people become dependent. You know, communism, socialism to an extreme.
Exactly.
Of course, you need some socialism to make things more equal and so on, but we don't want to push it to the extremes. So again, I mean, you have a vision. What is the vision? In America, Americans are going to have a big choice to make. I believe for you, and I've been hearing different experts, I spoke to many different people across Romania, to many important people here. I believe they consider this to be a very important election in many years, in many decades. You haven't had such an important election going forward. So I believe you're in the same situation as us, and people are hoping that something positive will come out of it. You know, it's not easy, but we have the type of leaders that we merit in life. I said, if you want a strong leader, you have a strong leader. So Americans believe strongly in Trump. You know, there's a sense that either you like him or you don't. I think there's a big shift, even though you might not see it. What's very, very interesting in America, it's a demographic and a social shift where you have many Latin Americans, you have African Americans that have been moving to the Republican. The working class has been moving to America. You have many unions supporting Trump. Never in history have you seen such a shift. Of course, you're not going to see them in the masses, but compared, even 10, 20% is something that you've never seen before happening in U.S. elections. So there is a big, big shift going on in America. I believe it'll make a big, big difference. Again, the polls are tainted for me, because that's very important, because you're talking about polls a lot. Look what's happening, are ones in favor. But again, I believe the polls are tainted. Look at the 2016 polls, how tainted they were regarding Clinton and Trump at the time. They were saying by 5-10% Trump would lose.
Yeah.
So again, I do not trust the polls, okay, going forward. And I believe you have what you see on the ground. You have thousands and thousands of people waiting online all night, 10, 12, 15 hours to see Mr. Trump. When you look at the rallies for Mrs. Harris, they bus in the participants, the people to come in, and that's what they do, the same people, and then you see it on social media. What's very interesting today is you have Twitter, which is showing a much more balanced approach, because you have Elon Musk. I think that's something very different today. He's a libertarian. No, why he's being supported? Because I think he loves Americans, he's a patriot, he's a libertarian, and he believes that Trump is what's the right thing for today. Like Mr. JFK Jr. or RFK Jr. is the same thing for Kennedys. They've all been Democrats. Why? You have to look at it. It's a major, major thing for Robert Kennedy Jr. to be supporting Trump. We represented 6 to 8% of the Democrats. Many Democrats, we don't hear about it that often, and they don't want to talk about it in the mainstream media. But it's a big thing to have Mr. Kennedy being part of the administration, and he's most likely going to be the health secretary going into it, and he's taking a major role in the campaign today.
Actors from Hollywood, even movies, come to change the narrative.
The narrative is very different because the AI on Twitter has made the thing a more level playing field. That's very, very important. We don't need, the Google AI is pro-Democrat. The AI on Facebook, Instagram, pro-Democrat. Again, they filter negative information. Go try to find information. They've hushed all information regarding the Donald Trump assassination attempt. When you try to find information, it's very hard to find information because it puts a negative light on
the two assassination attempts.
Put it on a negative light. They know that it's a factor that brings Americans toward Donald Trump. Look what's happening. They don't talk about it. You try to get information. I'm doing research on that subject, trying to do an article. It's very hard to do in a subject because it's hard to find information.